Heaviest and most persistent rain probably across central parts of the country. Scotland, however, largely dry for the main bulk of the country, but still the risk of some further sleet and snow affecting the far north of the country, and under the clear skies a widespread frost developing here. So for many parts of England, Wales and Northern Ireland, it's going to be a bit of a wet start to the new working week. That rain will ease off a tad as the day goes on, but the driest and clearest conditions will be for parts of Scotland. But even here, we will still see a few wintry showers. And as that rain bumps up into the colder air, it will turn increasingly to sleet and snow across the high ground of England and southern Scotland. Highest of the temperatures down towards the far south again, with potentially 13 degrees.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
It seems that the younger generation's interest in literature is waning. Academics argue that educational policies have failed to encourage reading for pleasure, contributing to declining numbers of English literature students and a shift towards young adult books rather than classic novels. According to 2023 figures from the National Literacy Trust, the number of 8 to 18-year-olds who say they enjoy reading has sunk to its lowest level for almost 20 years, with a quarter fewer reading each day over that same time period. To share more with us about this topic, I'm joined now by the journalist Charlotte Lytton. Charlotte, welcome back. Lovely to talk to you again. Tell us your perspective on this issue. What is happening?
Well, speaking to academics, we can't deny, it seems, that there is a big problem here, and it starts right at school. As you read there, young children simply don't enjoy reading for pleasure as they did before. We can't deny that is also a massive part because of smartphones, because kids now are faced with all of these things vying for their attention. They just don't have to sit down and entertain themselves with a long book and nothing else as they did before. As we see from those figures with people going to study humanities at university, the decline is just going all the way because people simply are not interested in reading for pleasure as they were.
Do you get any feeling that education policy or that teachers are taking steps to counter this?
Well, there is a review of the curriculum going ahead right now, but school is a huge part of it. One of the things that has come up in this conversation is whether teachers now are dealing with crowd control, which means they can't simply encourage reading for pleasure because they're simply trying to get a hold of the students they have.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show with me, Tom Harwood, putting the Tom in Tominey. Yes, I'm standing in for Camilla, but coming up on today's show, Transport Secretary Louise Hay will join me to discuss the government's £1 billion funding boost for bus services across England, although I'll also ask her some more juicy questions. I'll be asking the Shadow Home Secretary Chris Phil what he makes of the non-crime hate incidents in the wake of the investigation into Telegraph journalist Alison Pearson this week. And the Conservative MP for North West Hampshire, Kit Malthouse, will be with me to discuss the controversial assisted dying bill. Also, the award-winning journalist and broadcaster Hadley Gamble, who's interviewed Vladimir Putin, as well as leaders like Olaf Scholz, will bring me her take on world affairs. And, of course, yesterday we saw farmers protest outside the Welsh Labour conference against the government's changes to that family farm tax. Farmer Douglas Turner will join me ahead of the National Farmers Union event in Westminster on Tuesday. Well, we've got 90 minutes of punchy politics ahead. Don't go anywhere. Well, before all of that, and what a juicy show it will be today, there's time to go through today's front pages. Delighted to be joined by the former BBC broadcaster, Nicholas Owen. Nicholas, thanks so much for joining us here.
Good morning.
It's a broad smorgasbord of stories this morning. What have you picked out?
It is. Well, I think we should go straight to the... let's start with the Sunday Times. Their story about the immigration, yet again, coming up. Here we are with... we know what's happened in America. We have Donald Trump in and saying he's going to do all sorts of things, send people in all sorts of different directions if he can. And now we hear that the Home Secretary here is, as the headline here says, sent to pay millions to Vietnam and Kurdistan to try to beat the trafficking gangs. Now, the difference, let's be clear about what sort of they're thinking about here. Yes, Maloney-style migrant deals. That's a reference, of course, to the Italian leader who's been very robust on this.
Who herself got into a bit of trouble with the European courts over her policies. So, I mean, it does raise some questions.
It raised an enormous number of questions, of course. The first thing to say, though, it's not a Rwanda thing. Now, the fascination to me about Rwanda is that Donald Trump is now a convert to the idea of sending illegal immigrants who've got into the United States, sending them to Rwanda. This is not that. This is talking to countries to try to prevent people from coming in the first place, which, I don't know about you, Tom, but I've always thought that's really the root of this thing. Surely, if there was some sort of incentive for people to stay where they are or close to where they are. They can't stay in a country like Syria, for example, or something like that, where there's terrible conditions. But to prevent them leaving countries, Vietnam is a very, very good example of this. I mean, that's a country which has done quite well economically and everything else. So why are there still an awful lot of Vietnamese refugees on the move? So that's the idea. But this is, can I say, Labour thrashing around a bit, looking for some solutions. They came in saying they were going to tackle the boats and all this sort of thing. Here we are having what seemed to me to be almost exactly the same discussions as we're having with when the Tories were in, a year or two ago, 4 or 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
And the other thing about this plan is it seems really rather expensive. It's not sort of the magic bullet of, we'll just prosecute these people and everything will go away and everything will be nice. The same politicians who were bemoaning the cost of the Rwanda scheme will now be spending an equivalent amount of money on lots of other countries.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. I mean, I would have thought you're going begging, aren't you? You're doing the pleading, and they're going to be in the driving seat, if indeed it bites. I always think all these things are unrealistic, Tom, to be honest. I've sat here in this chair and said before, I was right back, I thought Rwanda was daft. I know a lot of people, perhaps on this channel, thought it was a good idea. I've never thought it was a good idea, and I don't think this one is either.
Well, goodness me. Shall we, on that note, move on to another concerning issue involving the Home Office once more? It's always involving the Home Office, isn't it? This is the Telegraph, because it's not just Telegraph columnist Alison Pearson, who has been getting these non-crime hate incidents.
We've got this new Julie Bindel, the writer, a writer who is very strong on sort of trans matters and so on. She says she was actually... One thing that fascinates me, if the police are coming to arrest you, Tom, on some sort of charge, they tend to come very early in the morning. They bang on the door and you're half asleep. They didn't do that in the case of this lady, Julie Bindel. She says she has been having had a problem. 2 policemen turned up on her door and said they wanted to discuss something that she tweeted a long time ago. And again, she's absolutely mystified. First of all, the police don't seem to say what it is. The policeman sent to your door do not have any details of what the complaint is. Just basically saying, would you like to come down the station sometime and have a chat about this? And she's written a piece inside the Sunday Telegraph saying, again, it's the old story. I'm sure almost everybody will say the same. Why aren't they out there dealing with the crime on the streets, dealing with all the things that really matter to people, instead of chasing around looking for hate crimes. No, sometimes it's non-hate crime, sometimes it's non-crime. Goodness knows. What a nonsense the whole thing is.
It's a mess, but of course, I mean, there is an argument. Is this the police and their problem, or is this the politicians for making all of these rules, for making all of these laws that, of course, the police then go on and have to enforce? It's something that we'll definitely be bringing up with the Shadow Home Secretary later on in the programme.
Good. Go for it when you do.
But of course, the Telegraph has another curious story, and that's President Zelensky,
yes.
who is sounding surprisingly pro-Trump, or is this all triangulation?
Well, I think first thing to say is that Ukraine had a very bad night. Terrible attacks by the worst yet, I think, almost the worst yet on their power supply. So it's a very, very difficult time for the country anyway. But the headline on this story is Zelensky: Trump will hasten end of war. Now, up to now, it's been pretty clear that President Zelensky was pretty fearful that Trump would try to impose conditions, would say he was going to end the war in a day, didn't he? That's what he said. But this would probably involve some sort of demilitarised zone or something, and forcing Ukraine to give up lots of territory, right off Crimea for a start, and most of eastern Ukraine.
Which is very much against what the Ukrainian government wants.
Everything they've done. But is this Zelensky actually looking reality in the face? Because the fact of the matter is, he's going to have to deal with, the whole world is going to have to deal with a rather different approach from the White House, whatever it is. So Zelensky, it looks to me, he's getting in first by saying, yeah, OK, the war can end with Trump if we're to believe that he's actually going to move on this. Facing reality, I guess. Very harsh reality, sad reality. I don't think there are any leaders that I've read of recently outside of Ukraine who've said, no, don't worry, we can go on and push Russia out of all of these places. If we're not prepared to supply the really serious missiles that would actually do real damage inside Russia, and there's no sign at all. The Biden administration certainly wouldn't do it. Trump certainly wouldn't do it, and we're not going to do it on our own. So it's sad reality.
Bonkers thing. We've sent billions of pounds to Ukraine. We've sent hugely expensive military equipment, and then we've said, oh, actually, you can't use some of these longer-range missiles if they would attack the missile launching spots that are attacking you. I mean, the restrictions that we've placed on the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian army are absurd.
Well, in a way, Tom, but on the other hand, escalation could lead goodness knows where. I mean, that's the reality of it.
I suppose that's the risk, and now everything is sort of turbocharging up until the 21st of January, when Donald Trump is inaugurated, when he's in control, when his finger hovers over the big red button in the Oval Office, as I'm sure there is one. And I suppose that means that both sides, Russia and Ukraine, will be going gangbusters through now until the 21st of January.
Yeah, 21st of January. That's interesting, isn't it? Can we talk about the last thing we were doing?
Let's do that.
Yeah, let's do that.
Because this all flows. It's almost like we planned this, because Donald Trump's been making some appointments.
He's been making some appointments, and all of them, every single one of them, people are going, oh my goodness. But here's the latest one. The last one, I think, really in the chain is the new press chief. This is a lady called Caroline Leavitt. She's supposed to be very tough, as you would expect. She'd work for Fox News, you would expect that as well. And here's the thing, she is 27 years old. Well, that's fine, Tom. What do you make of a 27-year-old in such a powerful position? I ask somebody who is perhaps roughly in the same area.
Well, a year or two ago, I'd have said that this is absolutely fine and proper. Now I would say that it's outrageous. How on earth is the Director of Communications in the White House younger than me? I won't have it. But of course, there has been a proud and long tradition of young people in positions of power. I mean, Pitt the Younger became Prime Minister at the age of 24.
Was it 24? Yes, that's right. Oh, absolutely. He had nothing against young people. But interestingly, back to where you started, you mentioned that the inauguration, January the 21st, I think it will be. Well, look back 4 years to the last inauguration, and the big argument was about the number of people in attending that inauguration. Was it Trump said it was the biggest crowd ever in the history of the world? This was denied. And right at the heart of that was whoever the press secretary was at the time.
Spicer.
Sean Spicer. And these press secretaries, they don't tend to last all that long.
Yes, I think Trump burnt through 3 or 4 in his first term. So I wonder if he's going to be trying to be more professional with his appointments this time round, or if actually it's a pretty hazardous job and no one can really be expected to last the full term.
It would be fascinating to see how this young lady handles this thing. Really will be.
Yeah, but of course she's not the only I don't think it's fair to say controversial appointment, but perhaps headline-grabbing appointment. We've also seen the peculiar appointments of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, people who traditionally have been Democrats but switched to Trump, but also are perhaps, dare I say it, walking through the edges of conspiracy land.
Yes, I think very much so. Well, Kennedy is the absolutely classic example, isn't he? But basically an anti-vaxxer, although he says vaccines will still be available to everybody, but he said an awful lot of things. But a lot of these others, I mean, about fracking and all of these things, put out their stalls very, very clearly. And depending on your point of view, are they extreme positions? Or is it better to have people who do actually have a very, very clear view of what they're doing?
Well, of course, in the election, fracking was a big issue. Camilla Harris 4 years ago said she wanted to ban it and then switched in the middle of the election campaign because it's hugely popular in Pennsylvania. It supports lots of jobs, lots of growth. So it's interesting, actually, that both parties in the United States are in a very, very different position from where both major parties in the United Kingdom are.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Well, we are an outlier, aren't we? I mean, the drift has definitely been towards the right, if you like it, and radical policies going back. Fracking is an extremely good example, but denial of climate change and all sorts of things. We're going to have to get used to it. This is a new world. Go back to what we were saying about Zelensky. Recognition of the fact that everything's changing. You've got a different sort of administration coming with Trump at Mark II, and you better get used to it, and you're going to have to adapt to it.
Although I do know that the new Republican senator for Pennsylvania, alongside many people in the Trump administration, have been saying that natural gas and fracking that is actually a lot cleaner because it means that people can use less coal, and so it's a sort of transition fuel. You can make green arguments in that direction, sort of, if it's less bad than the other option.
Yes, absolutely true. Absolutely.
But Nicholas Owen, thank you so much for the wonderful rip-roaring ride through the morning papers this morning. Really, really appreciate it. Well, after the break, I'll be joined by the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp. This is the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Tell us about this film, because it's obviously come from your own experiences.
We wanted to create something for the entertainment industry that wasn't just another kind of dull documentary. I mean, some of them are brilliant, they're very informative, but you kind of leave a bit bewildered and a little bit kind of flat. So we thought, I've got a passion for writing and you've obviously got an unbounded knowledge on the subject. Why don't we create a film with a kind of satirical look on eating disorders?
So this came it's been made 20 years after your own...
It is 20 years.
20 years,
practically to the day.
So Samantha, you suffered with OCD and an eating disorder as well?
Yes.
And that's when your mum became a counsellor, is that right?
A little bit later on, I think we spent a bit of time in the system and I realised that it wasn't working for us. So I took it on myself to learn as much as I could about the subject.
I call it a tragedy, probably the wrong word, but
suffering. No, it is a tragedy because mental ill health and eating disorders destroy the lives of not only the sufferers but their families as well.
But you've turned that into something so positive and so
It's
inspiring.
Amazing, really, that 20 years ago our story was just beginning, and 20 years on, we've done what we've done. But I have to say that very little has changed in the system.
I've heard that.
And I think that's what we're passionate about.
Yeah, so...
That was why we wanted to... I mean, I work with families every day and I see the destruction that eating disorders and other mental illnesses not just bring to the sufferer, but the whole family.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really passions me, because obviously 20 years ago we were there. And I just feel that so much more needs to be done. And I think with eating disorders, there is still a lot of misunderstanding around the subject.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show with me, Tom Harwood, putting the Tom in Tominey. Yes, I'm standing in for Camilla this morning. Now, Nicholas Owen is still with me in the studio. We're expecting the Shadow Home Secretary in a couple of minutes' time, I should say. But while we have a glorious couple of minutes, I did want to pick your brains on this curious story of the Shadow Chancellor. She's been updating her CV this week.
Yes, that's right, yes. I think what she said... go in detail through her CV. We all know she worked for the Bank of England. That was constantly being referred to. I think sometimes the seniority at the level at which she was actually employed there is sometimes under some doubt. But OK, she was definitely at the bank. She understands the economic processes, you know, the way decisions are made about interest rates, the relations between the bank and the government, which is always extremely important. All of that we give her full credit for. That's fine. But she also talked about an earlier part of her career being an economist, I think, with Royal Bank of Scotland.
HBOS, as it was.
HBOS, that's right, yes.
And this week, the website Guido Fawkes has discovered that Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor's LinkedIn page, has wiped that word economist from that particular job and changed it to retail banking.
Working in retail banking, yes. We must be a bit careful. And, I mean, Rachel Reeves is a very, very bright, sharp lady. I don't expect she was sort of sitting there in a counter of some branch somewhere sort of saying to people as they came in, you know, can I help you with your mortgage? I don't think it was that. But it wasn't quite at the level that had been expected or had been talked of before. You've got to be dreadfully careful these days. Everybody will catch you out at the slightest thing if you get a line wrong about your history.
You do have to be careful, but especially if you're the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who frankly has been picked up on various indiscretions before, the Wikipedia copy and pasting that was in her book, and now this sort of CV embellishment. Is this becoming a bit of a problem for her?
Well, I think it's the old story with politicians, and particularly the Chancellor of the Exchequer, particular post. Down the years, it's always been thought that people who really sort of, you know, deeply involved with economics throughout their career would probably make a better Chancellor. No real great evidence for that, frankly. The most famous example of somebody who wasn't involved in economics at all and always sort of professed a lot of healthy ignorance of it was Winston Churchill, who was Chancellor way back in the 1920s, I think. But he did fall among thorns eventually, took Britain out of the gold standard and did all sorts of things like that.
I think he put Britain back onto the gold standard.
That's right.
But at the pre-war parity, and of course the value of the British economy was not high enough to go at that previous value, and there was a sort of economic malaise that continued.
Well done. Your economic history. You're okay. You're fine. You're doing extremely well.
Don't recommend me for this job at number 11 Downing Street. I think anyone would be a fool to take it right now, given the prevailing economic winds.
Yes, absolutely.
But of course, this all follows a budget that has made a lot of people feel rather rather gloomy about the economy. We learned this week that the growth rate of the United Kingdom is much lower than expected. The last quarter under the Tories, it was 0.5%. Again, not great. But then this quarter under Labour, 0.1%.
Yeah, and that leads on to another story that's been around, of course, about which is, I think, the Sunday Times is a political editor, isn't it? Tim Shipman is written a new history, if you can call it that, looking back over the last year or two, recalling that story that Rishi Sunak was advised not to call the election when he did, but to carry on about this sort of time, I suppose, when the economy would have improved. Now, you and I were discussing this before we came in the studio. You pointed out that there would have been the interest rate cut, which would have helped, but I still think the economy would still have been puddling along much the way it has been. I don't think it would have made a lot of difference.
No, people won't have felt better off than they were 4 years ago, to use that old Reagan quote. But I suppose there would be one advantage, and that's it would miss D-Day, which would perhaps have saved a couple of Conservative seats for the Prime Minister. But yes, indeed. Nicholas Owen, thank you so much for talking through yet more stories. The Home Secretary, Chris Philp, will be with us after this short break.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win Christmas on Us this year. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag will get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Britain's newsroom. Weekday mornings from 9:30.
Maria, potholes are the bane of everybody that uses the road, whether you're a car driver or a cyclist. As a cyclist, are even worse. How have we got into this situation where our roads are in such a bad state?
Well, part of it is to do with actually our climate. In somewhere like, say, Sweden, like the snow will fall on the ground, it will stay there for months. Whereas here we've got what's called a freeze-thaw climate, where the water comes down, then we might have a cold snap and it freezes, and the water within the pothole will then expand and make the pothole bigger. Then we might have a mild spell, and then that process repeats. So, we do actually need extra funding to acknowledge the fact that, we just live in a climate where we're sort of particularly vulnerable to potholes.
Why? I mean, the fact that this happens, these weather conditions happen, is no great surprise to anybody. Why has the problem been ignored for so long?
I think what's happened is we've had, short-term funding. So it's like, oh, there's a pothole, let's patch it up. Oh, there's another one, let's patch it up. But the patches aren't actually really that strong, so then they break down again. So, really what we need is to have roads completely resurfaced, and then they'll just be pothole-free for a very long time. And that really is how funding should be. That's the direction funding should go in, as opposed to just sort of dribs and drabs here and there.
Do you think this government are going to be good for the motorist, or is there indeed a war on the motorist still?
The different parties come in and they've all got different policies that they wheel out, then they cancel the policies, and then there's so much lack of transparency. Like, for example, with the pothole issue, sometimes the government, whichever government is in office, will do some big showboating about how they're going to give X amount of potholes, and you still think that sounds really good.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show with me, Tom Harwood, standing in for Camilla this week. Now, we're talking about home affairs because there are a number of stories that are really related to home affairs that are dominating the newspapers this morning. Of course, the row over non-crime hate incidents continues to roll on, and a new Labour policy to try and stop the boats. Let's explore it all with the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp. Chris, thanks so much for joining us this morning. I want to ask first on this bizarre and ongoing story about more and more public figures getting knocks on the door from the police. First, Alison Pearson, now Jermaine Greer, simply for holding, as far as I'm aware, legal opinions.
Yeah, well, good morning. I think it is ridiculous that public figures, journalists, but actually members of the public as well, are getting police attention for essentially expressing opinions. The police should concentrate on crime, genuine crime, not on policing thought. Now, I think if they are going to pay attention to anything that doesn't meet the criminal threshold, that should be an extremely high bar. It should be behaviour which is very likely to lead to imminent criminality, but they should not be policing thought.
But is this not an issue not just of the police, but also of the politicians? After all, it's MPs like yourself who passed the online safety bill, who didn't repeal the 2003 Communications Act, all of these different pieces of legislation that do make opinions that could be seen to be offensive practically illegal.
Well, first of all, the Online Safety Bill, or the Online Safety Act as it now is, was significantly amended, and it now deals with content that is harmful to children, and I'm sure all of us can agree that children should be protected, and it deals with behaviour online that is itself criminal, like organising drug supply or that kind of thing. The Online Safety Act no longer actually deals with adult behaviour falling below the criminal threshold. It was changed, I think, rightly to do that.
Shadow Home Secretary, we have seen many examples of the Communications Act 2003 leading people to face suspended prison sentences for off-colour jokes. We know the famous case of the Scottish man who taught his dog to do a Nazi salute, ended up being dragged through the courts. There was another example of someone who was very disparaging towards the memory of Sir Captain Tom Moore, and said some very awful things about him, but ended up getting a suspended sentence. I mean, these are thought crimes, are they not?
Well, I think you're raising a reasonable point. We should be very careful about where the line is drawn for the criminal law, and these are questions I think that we should take a look at. We should not have the police policing thought crime, and things should only be illegal where they cause demonstrable harm, like serious harm to others. I'm concerned about the non-crime hate incident category, and in fact, when I was police minister, I actually tightened the rules quite considerably just a few months ago, and had plans to tighten them a lot further. And I'm very concerned to hear that Yvette Cooper, the new Home Secretary, is planning or is thinking about scrapping the changes that we introduced a few months ago that effectively raised the threshold for those non-crime hate incidents. Because you're quite right, people, journalists in particular, but the public as well, should not be getting visits from the police in relation to expressing opinions. And sometimes those opinions might be offensive, but we need to be very careful where that criminal line is drawn. And the police, as I say, should be concentrating on acts that are criminal, or if they're not criminal, then very close to the criminal threshold, and there should be a realistic and immediate chance of criminal behaviour following before the police take action. That is a very high threshold, and in some cases, like the case of, I think it was Julie Bindel, who was approached by the police for commenting on trans issues, in my view, that threshold wasn't met.
It is, of course, the College of Policing that came up with the idea for these so-called non-crime hate incidents back in 2014. It wasn't politicians who legislated for it. Do you think that the College of Policing should be sort of creating new categories of investigation like this, and these rather Orwellian-sounding blots to go on many people's files?
Well, I think we need to look at this Parliament needs to look at this whole issue again and to take control of it, essentially, because it is important. It is infringing on the rights of free citizens and journalists, and we need to make sure the line is drawn in the right place. I think that is something that Parliament should be looking at itself, and we do need to look at moving, I think, where that line is drawn.
That's interesting because, of course, the default answer from many politicians is the police are operationally independent in all of these matters. Do you think there should be some more, perhaps, political control?
Well, of course, not of day-to-day operational matters, no. So when we talk about operational independence, what we mean is that Parliament, acting for the public, set the laws, we set the legislative framework, and then the police apply those laws and act within that framework. That's what operational independence means. And if there are elements of the framework, the laws, the principles, that need to be looked at again, it is perfectly proper, I think, for Parliament to look at that. It is then up to the police to apply that in practice according to their own judgment, and that is what operational independence means.
That's very clear. Now, moving on to small boat arrivals, of course, the government has yet another new plan in terms of trying to stop those boats. It's no longer just smashing the gangs, it's also giving millions of pounds to countries like Vietnam or Turkey to try and stop the flow upstream. Do you think it will work?
Well, look, I mean, I'm happy to look at any constructive proposal, but no, I don't think it will work because ultimately you need a deterrent. I mean, the National Crime Agency have said you need a deterrent. Martin Hewitt, the government's new border czar, has said you need a deterrent as well. And we had one. We had the Rwanda scheme, but the Labour government scrapped it before it had even started. The first flight was due to take off on the 24th of July, I think, and they scrapped it before it even took off. And because we now have no deterrent, small boat crossings under this Labour government have actually gone up. Now, I believe, had we implemented the deterrent, so if people had crossed the channel, they would rapidly be removed, in this case to Rwanda, but it doesn't really matter where, then that deterrent would have stopped people even attempting the crossings. And I'm not speculating, I know that would have worked. Wait a second, I know that would have worked. No, well, I'm about to say it. No, I don't think it is, because we've seen it work elsewhere.
Because we've seen Georgia Maloney get struck down by the courts only last week. I mean, there is a conspiracy theory that perhaps has a bit of credibility lending to it, that one of the reasons the Prime Minister went so early in that disastrous general election was because he didn't want the embarrassment of yet again courts stopping flights from going to Rwanda.
Yeah, so there's two questions there. Firstly, I think in substance the scheme would have worked in practice because we saw it work in Australia, where they had a similar problem about 10 years ago, and Australia's Operation Sovereign Borders included a deterrent removal scheme. In their case, it was to an island called Nauru. And when we had a returns agreement with Albania, so when people crossed the channel and they got sent quickly back to Albania, we saw the number of crossings go down by 93%. So I think in substance we know a deterrent works. Now, you asked a different question, which is, would the courts have stopped it? And, I think we passed the Safety of Rwanda Act, which, for example, gave ministers the power to ignore one of these so-called Rule 39 judgments from Strasbourg, which the interim order which they used in the past, ministers would have had the power to do that. So I think the Rwanda bill could have been probably strengthened a bit, but I think it would have had a very good chance of being effective. And I think if we get back into government, I think one of the components of our plan, not the only component, but one of the components of our plan will be a removal deterrent scheme, because we have seen it work elsewhere. And you know what? Even the European Commission are thinking about it. Ursula von der Leyen, even, the Commission President, was urging member states, European Union member states, to do offshore processing outside the European Union. So even the European Union are looking at doing it. It's just a Labour government here that are too scared to.
OK, well, Chris Philp, Shadow Home Secretary, thank you very much for joining us here on the Camilla Tominey Show this morning. Thank you. Well, the time is 3 minutes past 10. You're watching GB News. Good morning to you. Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show with me, Tom Harwood, standing in for Camilla this morning. Lots more to come on today's show, including the Transport Secretary, Louise Hay, the Conservative Member of Parliament, Kit Malthouse, and farmer Douglas Turner, along with the award-winning journalist, Hadley Gamble. But first, it's your very latest news headlines with Will Hollis.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning. Your top stories on Sunday. Pressure is mounting on the government to reconsider its plan to apply inheritance tax to farmers for the first time. The Prime Minister has been accused of sneaking out like a rat rather than facing farmers protesting at the Welsh Labour conference yesterday. Thousands of farmers from across the country are descending on London this week in objection to the government's plan to tax assets over £1 million by 20% when farmers die. Earlier, GB News spoke to farmer Charles Godby.
They now, I'm sure, realise that their figures are wrong. We've got the evidence to show that they're wrong, but they're just burying their head in the sand. They don't want to admit it. We're not a farming dynasty. Yet we, through working hard, investing everything we have and taking far below the minimum wage, have managed to build up a sustainable farming business.
The government is expected to announce an Italian-style immigration deal with countries like Kurdistan and Vietnam. The Times reports the Home Secretary is preparing to pay millions of pounds to countries to fund preventative measures, stopping migrants from journeying to Britain. Despite scrapping the Conservatives' flagship Rwanda plan, Labour is said to be modelling their immigration policy on that of Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's deal with Albania. The Home Office has not confirmed to GB News which new countries they may be speaking with or the specifics of any reported deals. Meanwhile, The Sun newspaper reports that Donald Trump's team are looking at plans to deport illegal migrants to Rwanda. Following the scheme that was drawn up by the Conservatives, the president-elect is reportedly considering a number of different countries to send illegal immigrants to. A source close to Trump's team has said he campaigned on a promise to crack down on illegal immigration, and he is determined to stick to it. China is ready to manage differences while working with Donald Trump, according to the country's president. Xi Jinping met with American President Joe Biden for the final time at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperative Summit in Peru. President Xi said that despite ups and downs, the relationship between the countries has been stable during the last 4 years. Meanwhile, Joe Biden said competition should not veer into conflict. President-elect Trump has pledged to apply tariffs to Chinese imports during his last term of office. He labelled COVID the Chinese virus. Back to the UK, Conservative peers are planning to delay the handover of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius to allow Donald Trump to block the controversial deal. Sir Keir Starmer's government, has already agreed a draft treaty for the transfer. However, opponents of the plan say giving up the British overseas territory could give China greater influence in the region, threatening the security of a US airbase. In other news, a woman found dead in the boot of a car has been named by police as Harshita Brella. The 24-year-old was discovered in London last Thursday after police received a call from a member of the public concerned for her welfare. Police believe the woman from Corby in Northamptonshire was attacked by someone she knew. But detectives from the East Midlands Special Operations Major Crime Unit say they're keeping an open mind. A mandatory referral has been made to the Independent Office for Police Conduct by Northamptonshire Police because of previous contact with Miss Brella. A Labour peer has criticised railway death traps after he was injured falling between a gap between the train and the platform last month. Blind former Home Secretary David Blunkett needed hospital treatment after the accident at Westminster Tube Station. The Labour Lord said his feet slipped while boarding the train behind his guide dog. He's demanded Transport for London do more to protect blind passengers. And finally, Colleen Rooney and a whole host of other famous faces are set to enter the jungle this evening as this year's series of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here launches. The show will see campmates tackle bush tucker trials in order to win food and other prizes. Other contestants include Coronation Street actor Alan Halsall, Radio 1 star Melvin O'Doom and journalist Jane Moore. Time for me to get out of here, but let's get back to Tom in the studio.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Well, thanks very much to Will, and welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show with me, Tom Harwood, standing in for Camilla this Sunday. Lots more to come on today's programme. Transport Secretary Louise Hay will be with me. I'll be asking her about reports today of Labour's deals with countries like Vietnam to deter migrants, and of course some of those cost overruns in her department too. The farmer Douglas Turner will share his thoughts on the government's changes to inheritance tax for farmers ahead of the National Farming Union's lobby event in Westminster this week. And the award-winning journalist Hadley Gamble will share her experiences of interviewing the Russian President, Vladimir Putin. But first, delighted to be joined by the Conservative Member of Parliament for North West Hampshire, Kit Malthouse. Kit, thank you so much for joining us on the show this morning. You, of course, have been a proponent of what's known as assisted dying. Some people who oppose it call it assisted suicide. It's become a more and more contentious issue the closer to a vote the House of Commons has got. Why are you supporting this particular bill?
Well, Tom, over the last 10 years, I've been campaigning broadly on and off in between being a minister for assisted dying, because it became clear to me many years ago that there were some people who at their end of their lives, medicine just couldn't help. And as a result, we were consigning them to agonizing, painful and degrading deaths when that could be avoided. And when we looked around the world at other models, like in Oregon or in Australia, I could see that there was a better option that might be available to them. And I became more and more dissatisfied with the status quo that we have at the moment, where we've got about one person a week going business class to Switzerland to Dignitas to take their lives, but something like 650 odd people a year who are committing suicide in horrible, violent ways because they just can't face the agony that awaits them at the end of their life. Now, rather than have this horrendous kind of unregulated Wild West, it seems sensible to me for some time that government should intervene. There should be some regulation and control over this. And that's why I've been supporting the bill for the last 10 years or so.
Of course, there are some particular concerns about this particular private member's bill that has been brought forward. Not the same level of scrutiny that a government bill would have in the House of Commons, and some real concerns over those safeguards that exist within it. The fact that only 2 doctors are required and you can keep going through and looking for different doctors until you get the right answer.
Well, I don't think that's entirely fair, Tom. I mean, the bill will go through exactly the same process that government bills go through, and in fact, in many ways, may get more scrutiny. It has to go through both houses of Parliament and may have to ping-pong between the two before it goes forward. And MPs have several points at which they can vote for or against. It's worth also bearing in mind that the debate takes place in places other than in the chamber. So both sides of the debate are holding extensive meetings in Parliament with experts from around the world and from particular fields to talk about and debate these issues. We had some, for example, on Wednesday night, we had some medics from Australia and California talking about their experience of it, that MPs can gather the information that they need to make that kind of decision. And in terms of the safeguards, the bill that Kim Leadbeater, that I'm supporting, that she's drawn, has the strongest safeguards you can have pretty much you can find anywhere in the world. I mean, 2 doctors having to agree that you're within 6 months at the end of your life, that you have a settled will to proceed, that you're not being coerced, and then a High Court judge effectively signing off at the end, having questioned those doctors and indeed having the power to question you and others before you personally get the choice to decide whether you proceed with it. And to me, for somebody who's facing a horrible, agonizing death, this is a profoundly important option that we need to give them, so they, rather than disease, controls how they die.
And yet, is there not an issue with this shopping around for doctors' clause? The fact that a doctor may well not agree with your request to end your own life, and then you can simply disregard that doctor and find another one. Is that not a bit of a flaw in the plan?
No, because you need 2 doctors. It's not that the doctor doesn't agree. Where you can seek another doctor is that if the doctor declines to participate. So if the doctor conscientiously objects, and there should be get-outs in the clause for them to object, that is different from them saying, no, I think you have 12 or 24 months to live. Critically also, though, doctors are allowed to consult other specialists who might have greater knowledge of the particular disease from which you're suffering, or indeed a psychiatrist or a psychologist to assess your capacity. So there are very strong medical safeguards in there as well. And don't forget that a judge will preside over the whole thing. So a judge is able to assess whether there is a settled will and how the doctors have performed, and has to, by law, question at least one of the doctors about the process. Now, when somebody is facing, a horrible death, if you suffer from motor neuron disease, sadly, you know that you're going to effectively choke to death at the end of your life. Having these safeguards is important, but we have to balance that against the need for that person to have that choice, to control the manner of their death and overcome this appalling disease, if you like, that is going to kill them in a horrible way. Now, that has to be done within a respectable period of time. We think 6 months is about right. And we know from around the world that where this has been introduced in places that follow the same model that we're following, terminally ill adults within 6 months, that it is profoundly successful. And over time, the medical profession actually come to welcome it.
Of course, you have mentioned California, you've mentioned Australia. The one territory you haven't mentioned is Canada, where I think a lot of people assess it has gone perhaps further than many would have liked, that there has been this sort of thin end of the wedge leading to a thicker end of the wedge, that people can be seen to be near the end of life if they have, for example, suicidal thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, Canada doesn't follow the same model as us, and they have a different legal system. So they've got a thing called the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is like a sort of constitution, which has been used to kind of expand the law. But just because a certain territory does it in one way doesn't mean we shouldn't do it in our own way. So, for example, I think it's still the case that abortion is legal in Canada well beyond the time limits that we impose. I think almost actually legal up till the point of birth. That doesn't mean to say we shouldn't have abortion in this country. And I think given that we're a 1,000-year-old democracy, we should be able to design a law which satisfies our own cultural sensitivities and requirements and gives those people that choice. But I think the point here, Tom, is to recognise that the choice before MPs is not between something and nothing. It's between the status quo, which for far too many people...
Oh, I'm sorry, Kit Malthouse, your line is just breaking up there, but we do get your point that that currently the status quo for many people is absolutely horrendous, and there is this unregulated market, and perhaps a new law would regulate it. But this is, of course, a very contentious issue, and those debates will continue. But a big thanks to Kit Malthouse, Conservative MP, for talking us through that one. Well, after the break, award-winning journalist Hadley Gamble, someone who has been in the rare position to have interviewed Vladimir Putin, will be with me in the studio. This is the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Following the summer riots and the resurgence of far-right ideologies, the former Education Secretary told peers that reinforcing shared values is now more crucial than ever.
So we're asking this morning, should we teach British values, or would it be a step backward?
Or how do you even start? To debate this now, we're joined by the Campaign for Real Education chairman, Chris McGovern, and political commentator Matthew Stadland.
Well, I think these days, particularly in schools, it's quite fashionable to look at the negative sides of Britain's identity, particularly British history. Personally, I think I'm very proud of being British, and I think we need to be proud of our country like most other countries around the world are.
As Chris says, Matthew, lots of other countries do it. Heck, you only have to look at the United States, don't you, to see how sort of patriotic they are. Is there anything wrong in trying to instil a bit of that amongst our youth?
I'm just worried it sounds a little bit communist, Stephen, being told what it is to be British. I've got my own personal but very vague views of what British values might be: inclusivity, patience, being able to queue, decency, respect for democracy and the rule of law. But I mean, very many people will have different sets of values. Some people are racist. So are British values racist? You talked about the far right. I think we all know what the far right is. It's sort of violent, xenophobic racism. But if you have, say, I don't know, 3-4 million people in this country who might describe themselves as racist or far right, and they're British, or as British as you lot and as I am, does that mean those values get taught in schools? My worry is it's a little bit communist.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show with me, Tom Harwood, standing in for Camilla this weekend. Now, with me is the award-winning journalist and broadcaster, Hadley Gamble. Now, Hadley, you are in the rare position of having interviewed Vladimir Putin, looked him in the eyes, and got a sense of who he is as a human being. I want to start there.
Yeah.
Is he mad?
Absolutely
is he
not.
bad? Or is he just something that we haven't quite figured out in the West?
Well, we've had 20 years to figure out this gentleman, and we have consistently failed to do so. And I think that what you're seeing now is a continuing of failed policies, not just by the White House and various administrations, but also by European leaders. And today, we're looking at a situation where Europe can't afford to defend Ukraine, and the United States is no longer going to do so under a Trump presidency. So things are moving very quickly. I think for the EU, I mean, if you pursue consistently over years politics and policies of economic suicide, this is the situation that you find yourself in. You can't project your foreign policy in the ways that you would like to. And I think that perhaps we sold President Zelensky and the Ukrainians a raw deal in making them think that we were going to be able to fund this conflict and to fund this war, forever and ever and ever until they got their goals met, whatever those goals may be, because I think that the goalposts have changed quite a bit. And now we're in a situation where obviously the president-elect has said multiple times, I want to put an end to this war as quickly as possible. How he's going to do that remains a bit fuzzy. But for the Ukrainians, it would seem that it would behoove them to get to the table as quickly as possible. And I say that because no doubt they're going to get a better deal while Joe Biden is still in the White House. Right. And whoever is running the United States is still running it. That's open for debate. But they're going to get a better deal and a better Marshall Plan, if you will, for that country if they move quickly.
Do you think that there's this almost sort of rush from both sides now to sort of try and fix the position to make it most favourable before the 21st of January when Donald Trump is inaugurated? Yeah. Are we perhaps going to see one of the bloodiest periods in this war as both sides scramble for the last-minute upper hand?
Take the step back and think about what both sides want to achieve here. We know the goals of the Ukrainians: keep as much of their land as possible and keep as much autonomy as possible. But for Vladimir Putin, much of this is about saving face. And I think Henry Kissinger actually pointed that out in the early days of the conflict, which is we've got to figure out a way for them to get out in such a way that he saves face and also that, frankly, the global economy can get back on track. And I say that with regards to Europe, as we know, we have anemic growth. And then in Russia, quite the contrary. You have the fastest growing of advanced economies is the Russian economy.
Although the ruble is declining and declining and declining in terms of its value.
Indeed, but at the same time, this is a man who was able to turn things around in 2 short years, whereas the West has been consistently putting on these economic sanctions that if you cover energy, which I do, you could have told them in the very beginning, these are not going to work, they're not going to be effective. There's even a conflict right now in Azerbaijan talking about, Russian gas and sort of the pushback from European nations about the fact that they still require Russian gas.
Yeah, and one of the remarkable stories that perhaps is not reported on enough is the German story of the last decade or so.
The sick man of Europe.
The entire German economy, built on energy-intensive manufacturing, was built on this model of importing cheap gas and oil from
Greed
Russia.
and hubris.
Right? And then suddenly that does not become cheap anymore. That gets rather expensive and sanctioned and all the rest of it. And the German economy has spent most of the last 2 years in recession. You've interviewed Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, who might not be the Chancellor of Germany for much longer, given the collapse of his government.
Exactly.
What do you make out of how Germany in particular has handled these peculiar last 3 years?
It's been fascinating to watch, to be honest, because the last time I interviewed Olaf Scholz was in February of this year. Already the German economy was shrinking. They were going to have a really, really bad year, and I think only beaten by France in terms of their economic growth or lack thereof. And this was a man that was in seemingly total denial of how bad it was. But they are the sick man of Europe. The question going forward is going to be how they get their economy back on track without going back to nuclear, trying to source these other forms of energy. They're obviously looking to the United States. They're looking to Qatar as well.
Do you think there's no chance they'll reopen their nuclear power stations? Because one of the bizarre points in this story that we haven't yet landed on is the fact that the year before the world went into an energy crisis, the Germans decided to turn off the most powerful, cleanest, greenest form of energy that is known to man. They switched off their nuclear power stations just as they were heading in to a energy crisis. I mean, what a choice is that?
Well, this is a country, of course, that, you know, on the surface, they'll say again and again, no, we're not going back to nuclear. But at the same point, this was the engine of European growth. This was the country that was leading Europe. The policies pursued by Angela Merkel, obviously, highly questionable in hindsight. And even at the time, President-elect Trump, at that time, as president, questioned repeatedly what they were doing and why they were doing it. And aren't you just playing right into Vladimir Putin's hands? And of course they were. But at the same point, you know, this is a country that needs to get back on track. There's already more right-wing pushback than I think that anyone would like to see. And that obviously is economic. So they're going to have to really have a hard think about, you know, the green policies that they've been pursuing, whether those have been effective. We've seen that they unfortunately conflict with, you know, the industrial policies that they want to pursue, and whether what, you know, has made sense in the last few years can continue to make sense for them.
Germany had, of course, been dragging its feet on sanctions on Russia because of their particular economic model, I suppose. Now, with this call between Olaf Scholz and Vladimir Putin, could we start to see Germany being the first crack in that sanctions wall? I mean, we've seen Volodymyr Zelensky, Boris Johnson really criticise this call.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is just a realisation that the party is over. And I mean that in the sense that the Americans are not going to continue to fund Europe's defence. Olaf Scholz understands that. And I think that you're going to consistently see over the next several weeks, couple of months, movement from Europe to this realization, you know, they can't afford it. The policies have not worked, and they're going to have to come some kind of a deal here. And I think for Zelensky in particular, and for the Ukrainians, I mean, these are the people that are really hurting. They're the ones that have been on the front lines. They are the ones who deserve some kind of Marshall Plan, some kind of future. They deserve their energy protected. They deserve the billions of dollars in investment that will be unlocked potentially as soon as this war ends. I mean, we have BlackRock and JP Morgan already saying they want to put billions into this country in terms of energy infrastructure, general infrastructure, agriculture, IT. I mean, there's a lot of money to be made. So if you're a financial journalist, as I am, you look at this from the perspective of how quickly can they put an end to this conflict and how quickly can they get people back on their feet? And I think that leads to the bigger question of who will then be running Ukraine. Will it be a wartime leader like Vladimir Zelensky? And obviously, this is very Churchillian in that sense, right? Post-war England was not too keen on keeping this man around. So we'll see.
It will be absolutely fascinating. But just finally, do you think we're going to see a substantial loss of territory for Ukraine? Could we see basically the battle lines as they've been frozen for the last year and a half? Will that be the shape of the new Ukraine?
It's all about how quickly they decide to cut a deal and who's in the driver's seat. You know, there are a lot of questions about whether or not they should have been pushing for that peace deal prior to the U.S. election. I think, you know, in hindsight, we know many things, but the feeling on the ground in the United States, particularly with the Republicans in Congress, was not Ukraine. It was more about U.S. tax dollars going to something that there was no end in sight. And I think that, unfortunately, between the Europeans, between the government in Kyiv, and obviously the Biden administration, they were not very helpful in allowing this conflict to be protracted because it means they have less leverage.
OK. Well, award-winning journalist Hadley Gamble, thank you so much for joining us here on the Camilla Tominey Show. Appreciate your time this Sunday morning. Now, coming up, the farmer Douglas Turner will join me live from his farm to discuss the protests set to take place this week in response to the government's new family farm tax. See you very shortly. This is the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. Looking ahead, certainly turning much colder for all of us. Some rain around too, and that rain will turn to snow in places from time to time. Out there at the moment, though, we do have some sunshine around, especially across eastern parts of the country. Further west, more in the way of cloud, but even here, the cloud will break up in places to allow some brighter spells. Thickest of the cloud up towards Northern Ireland, where that will produce some patchy rain, and that patchy rain will move towards northwestern parts of England and Wales as the day goes on. Some sleet and snow showers also developing later on across parts of Scotland, with the highest temperatures most likely down towards the far south, with highs here reaching 10 to 11 degrees. So the sleet and snow showers continuing across the far north of Scotland during the evening. Even at lower levels, we could just see a dusting, and that will produce some icy patches too. Further southeast towards Northern Ireland, we come back into the cloud and rain, and that rain will spread its way towards the Midlands as we approach Sunday evening. But the far south of England probably remaining dry until the bitter end of the day. But for many parts of England, Wales and Northern Ireland, it's going to be a fairly wet night. Heaviest and most persistent rain probably across central parts of the country. Scotland, however, largely dry for the main bulk of the country, but still the risk of some further sleet and snow affecting the far north of the country, and under the clear skies, a widespread frost developing here. So for many parts of England, Wales and Northern Ireland, it's going to be a bit of a wet start to the new working week. That rain will ease off a tad as the day goes on, but the driest and clearest conditions will be for parts of Scotland. But even here, we will still see a few wintry showers. And as that rain bumps up into the colder air, it will turn increasingly to sleet and snow across the high ground of England and southern Scotland. Highest of the temperatures down towards the far south again, with potentially 13 degrees.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss my big opinion. Mark Meets and my take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show with me, Tom Harwood, standing in for Camilla this Sunday. Now, the National Farmers Union has organised a mass lobby event for Tuesday in response to the government's decision to change inheritance tax relief for farmers, what's been branded the family farm tax. It comes as yesterday farmers in Wales protested outside the Welsh Labour conference. So with me now, live from his farm, is Douglas Turner, a farmer himself. And Douglas, I gather that you are reflecting a real feeling of horror, potentially, that many family farms could well cease to be within the next generation.
Absolutely, Tom. What's happened, why the government have probably brought this in, is because of all the corporates that have bought farms and tried to use the inheritance tax aspect of it. But for farmers themselves, we do need to be able to pass farms on generation onto generation, because it's our workplace. We have so much trouble at the moment with net zero, with the nut zero people. They want to get rid of the CO2. They have no idea how long, how many hours we work and to make food. And then at the end of the day, they want to slap on an inheritance tax, which, if they're going to have it, the threshold needs to go up higher. It needs to be about 10 million or something like that, because there are so many farms that are within the £1 million. I'm sorry if the camera keeps moving, but as you can see behind me, I've got a few sheep around me at the moment that keep pushing me around. And I think
well, no, it's wonderful atmosphere. But Douglas, I suppose this shows how farming is not a 9 to 5 Monday to Friday job. You're out there amongst your sheep on Sunday morning.
Absolutely. We work 7 days a week, normally 7 to 10 hours minimum, quite often 12 hours. We had some people recently wanted to come and work part-time because they said about, the civil servants to do a 4-day week. We said, that's fine, you can do a 4-day week, but you're looking about 60 to 80 hours. And they said, how can that be so? I said, well, we've just finished the harvest. And with the harvest, we are doing, 10 hours a day easy, because we have to feed the population. What the population don't seem to think, and also this is along with the inheritance tax, when people say that we get subsidies and benefits, food is too cheap all the time. If food was the price that it actually cost us and the time that we put in to make it happen, it would be far more expensive. So we get the subsidies, yes. We actually had the inheritance tax assistance as well, but that's been abused by a lot of people, and this is why possibly that they bought it in. But that with the nut zero people, the CO2, and don't forget, Tom, CO2 makes things grow all the time as well.
Of course, there is a view. It's been articulated by some commentators. John McTernan, the former advisor to Tony Blair, said on this television channel that perhaps we could do without family farms in the United Kingdom. And if we're to follow that logic, there might well be many people, perhaps in the Treasury, who would say that actually there are other countries that have much larger farms, much more efficient farms. And the UK is perhaps more of an outlier with the small family-run farms that perhaps make food more expensively than these mega corporate farms that you see in some other countries. Do they have a point?
No, not at all. The mega farms then will have more control over the price and the cost of everything, and they will then increase it. What we will have, you've got all the tick boxers that think that we should do this, that and the other. Oh, we're going to be green, we're going to be that. I think a lot of the green from the Labour is the green of envy, not anything else. How can you have people that have never farmed want to take control of things, grow things in factories? We can't be having that at all. We've got to actually have it with the small family farms. Otherwise, we've lost control of that. And then if you've got the big corporates, they'll be dictating to us what we're going to have to eat, when we're going to be able to eat it. And if we don't have a good harvest, which sometimes we don't, it's flown in from another country. But we've ticked the box that we didn't do it here, but it's coming from there. The quality of the products, especially with the livestock, the paperwork that we have to
Douglas, we don't have much time. I do just want to get in one more question, if we can, which is, I've seen lots of reports about lots of different protests that might take place. What sort of protests can we expect next week from farmers?
Well, I think it can be as good as it can be. I don't think we're going to go down the French route, because if we do that and we start putting compost and different things all over the place, that we're going down like the Just Stop Oiks. That's not the way to go. People are supporting us. They've got to go to their local farm shop and to buy the produce from us. Go to your local farm if you can do, but always support British farming.
Tremendous message. Douglas Turner, thank you so much for joining us live from your farm amongst your sheep. It's been a delight to sort of get that rural insight this Sunday morning.
Thanks very much.
Well, earlier I spoke to the Transport Secretary, Louise Hay. We're going to bring you that interview, it's a bit punchy, after this. This is the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date. Or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Headliners Tomorrow's papers tonight, every night from 11 p.m.
Telegraph now with bra news. And Lewis, do you remember when you took your girlfriend for her first fitting?
This is M&S Transro. After I've got a youngish girlfriend. But
she was youngish when you first met her 20 years ago.
Yes, stay young. I don't know. I don't even want to read it. It's so pervy. It sounds pervy. If I think it's pervy, it's probably very pervy.
Okay.
It says it's first bras for young things. They can't even say young girls.
Well, let's have a look at it. It is it's upsetting. Strong, smart, strong, supported. First bras for fearless young things. So this has been picked up. Actually, Bev Turner from GB News. Took a photo of it, put it online. It's created a bit of a furore.
First of all, those kind of bras are basically unnecessary. They were when I was that age.
Wearing your bra.
Wear those bras. They used to call them training bras, and I don't know if they really were necessary at that time because they didn't have like.
You've really got to the heart of this, haven't you?
This is the one time I'm not going to interrupt you.
Yeah, it's not. No, they're not really necessary. It's not. Because otherwise...
So really, this is a non-story.
Okay.
Well, I think it's... I don't know. I mean, there's a little bit of me that was kind of like, pick your battles. Is this the hill to die on? I don't know.
The young things, they're saying I would say it's a dodgy advert anyway, it feels like, because saying young things feels like... It's as it says here, like objective. It's sort of saying that they're objects.
Yes, but this is my point about the West. Like, are you aware of a company called Pretty Little Thing? Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, one of the major brands for young women in this country is called Pretty Little Thing. I just think that's hilarious. Where were the feminists when they named that? So you go on the tube any day of the week and it says Pretty Little Thing and there's these women in tiny dresses and I don't know.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show this morning with me, Tom Harwood, putting the Tom in Camilla Tominey. Yes, I'm standing in for Camilla this weekend. Now, earlier on, I spoke to the Transport Secretary, Louise Hay. We covered a huge number of issues from £100 million bat tunnels to bus fares and indeed illegal migration. Here's what she had to say. Secretary of State, thank you very much for joining us this morning. I want to ask, first of all, on this news story that's broken overnight about the UK's migration policy. Could we really end up spending hundreds of millions of pounds and sending that to countries like Turkey, Vietnam, or indeed areas like Kurdistan to try and solve this problem?
Well, look, it's no secret that the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary have been working with our international counterparts across the globe to tackle this issue. This is not an issue that we can resolve at our own borders, but we need to work with international partners to tackle the issue upstream. That's why we've already made deals with Kosovo, with Serbia and North Macedonia, and it's already reaping results. We've returned 9,400 people in the last period, which is a 19% increase on the previous year. This is clearly the way to tackle the issue. And just last week, one of the biggest suppliers of small boat engines was arrested in the Netherlands and deported to Belgium. That's a direct consequence of the joint intelligence agreements and operations that we've been doing with other governments.
Of course, but amid all this, the numbers coming across on small boats are higher this year already, and the year's not even over, than the numbers were last year. I mean, surely there's got to be a bit of reconsideration now with regard to the Rwanda policy. One of the arguments that your government made about scrapping the Rwanda policy was that it cost hundreds of millions of pounds. And now this morning we're learning that your government is going to be spending hundreds of millions of pounds, but on a series of other countries.
Well, yes, the Rwanda scheme cost hundreds of millions of pounds and it returned 4 volunteers to Rwanda. It was completely ineffective, it wasted taxpayers' money and it didn't act as a deterrent. So we are committed to a long-term plan, working with international partners. It was up and running prior to the election. The previous government promised planes were going to be off the tarmac on multiple occasions, and only 4 volunteers were sent to Rwanda at a cost of hundreds of millions of pounds to the taxpayer. It was never anything more than a gimmick. We are committed to a long-term solution, working with international partners. It's why the Prime Minister was at Interpol, committed to public funding of operations, and why, as I say, it is already reaping consequences, with 19% increase on returns from last year.
Of course, during the election, the Prime Minister said the first scheduled flights were due to go off later in July. That, of course, never happened after the election result. But I do want to get on to buses this morning, because you've got a big announcement. £955 million for the bus network.
Absolutely. We're delighted to announce today almost £1 billion for local bus services. This will drastically improve reliability and services in every corner of the country. And for the first time, we are committing this funding in a fair, transparent way. The previous government took funding streams and they made areas compete against each other, with particularly rural areas losing out. Today, the funding settlement will give areas like Essex, Kent, Devon and areas across the north like Blackburn and Liverpool record sums of money to put into their bus services, which will increase reliability, improve real-time information and things like accessibility at bus stops and bus stations.
Of course, this extra money is coming at the same time that bus fares are going up. That £2 cap being raised to £3, a 50% increase for the cost that many people will be paying for their buses. Is this new announcement today just a sort of hurried PR exercise in order to sort of row back on those cuts that you made to buses?
No, you don't get £1 billion out of the budget as a hurried PR exercise. This is a really important balance between affordability of bus services and reliability. And the truth is that for too many parts of the country, they don't have reliable bus services. If you live in some rural towns or villages, you don't have a bus that turns up before 9 a.m. or after 5 p.m. And that's why the balance had to be struck between providing local areas with this kind of record settlement in order to expand and improve the reliability of services, because if you don't have a bus at all, it really doesn't matter how much the fare is, and that was the balance that had to be struck. So that's why we're providing record settlements, particularly to rural areas that have been so historically underserved by bus services.
Would it be fair to characterise the sort of political decision that's been made here as one that leads to slightly more expensive buses but more regular buses? Is that the bargain that you've made?
Well, the bus fare cap was due to end on the 31st of December. That was the funding settlement that I inherited. So we've stepped in to protect bus fares, and particularly bus fares in rural areas, because if I hadn't taken that action, then they would have jumped up to as much as £13, £14 in some instances. So capping it at £3 is a reasonable settlement. But crucially, the way that we've designed this fare cap means that not all fares will rise to £3. Operators will not be allowed to rise fares any more than inflation. So I would anticipate that a lot of urban fares, a lot of city centre and routes that cover cities will not rise to £3. So it is a fair settlement. It's keeping bus fares affordable, and it's improving the reliability and the number of services that will be available.
OK, I also want to get on to one of the biggest sort of transport, perhaps disasters, if that's not too strong a word, of the last decade or so. HS2. Where on earth are we with HS2? There seems to have been an awful lot of excited briefing one way or the other. Will there be trains going to Manchester after all?
So I was pretty horrified by the lack of ministerial oversight and the lack of government control of HS2 when I entered office. There had been no ministerial oversight at all, no ministerial task force. That was the first thing I did on entering office, was to set up joint work with the Treasury in order to try and bring the costs of HS2 back under control. And I set up an independent review in order to look at how we can bring costs under control of HS2 Limited, which which has been too arm's length from government, despite the fact that it is only spending taxpayers' money. So that was first and foremost my priority, to try and get spending under control. The Chancellor announced at the budget that we would be delivering tunnelling to Euston, because of course this project would not make any sense if it only came to the outskirts of London. It had to come to central London. But that's our priority now, is delivering phase one, which is Euston to Birmingham, and getting those costs under control. We are very clear that we'll be not resurrecting any further plans for HS2, and they will not be given any further scope beyond Birmingham.
When you say you're getting those costs under control, is HS2 still building a £100 million bat shed to protect 300 bats from a wood that they might happen to occasionally fly to?
Unfortunately, this spending decision was made by the previous government. It's another ridiculous example of where there was not enough accountability or oversight or political decision-making of HS2. They sat back and allowed HS2 to spend taxpayers' money completely with very little accountability over it. So that's absolutely part of the reason why we've set up this ministerial task force, and we're looking into the governance of HS2 to ensure that we can step in and stop spending like this happening in the future.
Of course, it's not just HS2 that's been staggered by these sort of peculiar environmental diktats to protect just 300 bats and spend £100 million doing so. Is there going to be a wider review of the impact of all of these environmental regulations, particularly the Legacy Habitats Directive that we are left with from the European Union? Is the government thinking about perhaps reforming some of these laws?
Look, it's quite clear that we've not got the balance right at the moment between doing what we need to protect the environment and nature, which is really important, and protecting taxpayers' money. So we are looking in a cross-government way at how we deliver infrastructure, including really important planning reforms and speeding up the way that the Environment Agency interacts with infrastructure. So that is being considered, because, as you know, this is a perfect example of where clearly the previous government did not get the balance right at all, and we're not treating taxpayers' money with the respect that it deserves.
There's another example of perhaps hundreds of millions of pounds being, I don't want to be so bold as to say wasted, but it's hard to use any other word when you look at the Lower Thames crossing. More than £300 million has been spent on the planning application alone for this proposed crossing of the Thames. That's more spent on the planning application than Norway spent actually building the longest tunnel in the world. And last month we learnt that we didn't get a final decision on the Lower Thames crossing. Your department delayed that decision again into next year. That's going to cost even more money. Why did you delay that?
Well, look, it's a quasi-judicial decision on the development consent order, so I'm not able to say anything further than what's already been placed on my written ministerial statement.
Can you comment on the £300 million plus that's been spent on the planning application alone without a single spade in the ground?
Well, without reference to the specific project, I can say that we are looking at widespread planning reform in order to speed up the decision-making process in the future and drive out some of those costs that have undermined the delivery of infrastructure in this country. It's widely held that UK infrastructure is more expensive than most of our international counterparts, and that is why we did a huge amount of work on this in opposition. I commissioned Jürgen Meyer, the former chief executive of Siemens, to do a huge piece of work for us, and that has informed a lot of our planning reform process and the decisions and actions that we've already taken in government in order to get infrastructure costs under control.
OK. Louise Hay, Transport Secretary, thank you so much for joining us here on GB News this morning.
Thank you.
Well, there you go. What a show it was. Thank you to all of my guests for joining me today. And of course, thank you for watching the Camilla Tominey Show with me, Tom Harwood. I've been standing in for Camilla here on GB News this morning. But this is not where the news stops. Oh no, there's plenty more to be discussed throughout the course of the afternoon, or indeed the morning. There's still an hour of morning to go. And up next, of course, is Sunday with Michael Portillo. You won't want to miss an eclectic smorgasbord of news, news, culture and all the rest of it. So do stay with us here on GB News. And of course, before we get to Michael Portillo and his brilliant show, we're also going to show you the weather forecast, because I know that there's been some rumours of snow across the country in recent days. Do they stack up to what the meteorologists are saying? Here's the weather.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. So we've got colder weather on the horizon for many of us, bringing some blustery snow showers, particularly to northern parts of Scotland. But before we get there, we've got an area of low pressure waiting in the wings out in the northwest of the UK that will be moving its way towards us through the end of the weekend and into the start of the new working week. Before we get there, though, it's a bit of a mixed picture as we go through this afternoon. Some sunny spells, some scattered cloud, plenty of showers around in the north and the west, and for northern parts of Scotland, these likely to turn to sleet and snow over the hills. There'll be some sunshine between those showers quite widely across the country, and it'll still be feeling quite mild in the south, temperatures just a touch above average, but further north with some blustery northerly winds, feeling quite chilly through this afternoon. As we then go into this evening, those showers continue to pile in across northern parts of Scotland. Perhaps we could see up to around 10 centimetres of snow across the high ground by the time we get to Monday morning, and it will be a really quite chilly end to the evening, particularly where we see those clear spells. For parts of Northern Ireland, northern parts of England, perhaps a bit more cloud around, so those blustery showers pushing in from the northwest. And for much of England and Wales as well, it will be a cloudy end to the day on Sunday. As we then go through the rest of Sunday evening, showers continuing across northern parts of Scotland, but southern parts of Scotland, northern parts of England, perhaps staying that little bit drier overnight, plenty of clear spells around. But a more organised band of rain pushes its way south and eastwards during the early hours of Monday morning, affecting southern parts of England and South Wales, perhaps turning heavy in places, and that will keep it just a little bit milder here, temperatures in the high single figures. But further north, quite a harsh frost to start on Monday morning, perhaps some icy stretches in places, so do take care during Monday morning's rush hour. As we then head through in towards Monday afternoon, this next area of rain arrives from the west, pushing its way eastwards as we go through the afternoon, perhaps turning to sleet and snow over any high ground across Northern Ireland. But there will be some sunnier spells across eastern areas, but it will still be a chilly feeling day with temperatures well into the low single figures further north, but a little bit milder further south.